Al Capone is best remembered as one of the most feared and ruthless gangsters in American history, ruling Chicago with an iron fist during Prohibition. His empire was built on illegal alcohol, gambling, and extortion, and he was responsible for countless acts of violence. But behind the terrifying persona of Scarface was an unexpected trait, an obsessive concern with hygiene. Few people know that Capone had an unusual passion for cleanliness, an obsession that followed him not only in his criminal enterprises but even into prison. This became especially evident when he was sent to Alcatraz, one of the most notorious prisons in the United States. While Alcatraz was already known for its strict discipline, it was Capone who would bring an even greater emphasis on hygiene, transforming the prison into one of the cleanest in the country. Capone's obsession with hygiene did not begin in prison. Even as a crime boss, he was known for enforcing strict cleanliness rules in his establishments. The restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos under his control were required to be spotless. Waiters had to wear clean uniforms, tables had to be wiped down constantly, and floors had to be scrubbed daily. Capone believed that a well-maintained and clean business attracted more customers and gave a sense of legitimacy to his operations. He also feared disease, something that ran deep in him, possibly because of his own declining health due to syphilis. He ensured that his personal environment was always sanitary, his clothes were always freshly laundered, and his homes were immaculately maintained. One of the key moments that fueled this obsession was when a relative of his became seriously ill due to contaminated milk. After learning about the dangers of unpasteurized milk, Capone became an unlikely advocate for its pasteurization, even lobbying in Chicago to push for stricter health regulations. This unlikely role as a hygiene advocate would later extend into his time behind bars. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion in 1931, first serving time in Atlanta before being transferred to Alcatraz in 1934. Unlike other prisons where his influence allowed him to live comfortably, Alcatraz was different. The prison was designed to break even the most powerful criminals by stripping them of their connections and privileges. Yet, even in the harsh conditions of Alcatraz, Capone found a way to impose his standards. His cell was reportedly one of the cleanest in the facility. He took great care in keeping his bed neatly made, his floor spotless, and his personal belongings in perfect order. Prison guards and fellow inmates noticed his meticulous habits. Unlike many prisoners who let their cells become filthy, Capone ensured that everything in his small space was as clean as possible. He also insisted on frequent showers and was known to wash his hands more often than most inmates. Capone's hygiene obsession didn't stop at his own cell. Even in Alcatraz, he still had influence. While his power was limited compared to his criminal days, his reputation ensured that other inmates listened to him. Those who didn't keep their areas clean were often pressured into doing so, sometimes through subtle threats, other times through outright intimidation. Stories suggest that Capone would confront inmates about their poor hygiene, telling them to wash up or clean their areas. Some prisoners, either out of respect or fear, began following his lead. Over time, guards started noticing that the prison was becoming cleaner, and they attributed much of this shift to Capone's presence. Inmates who previously ignored cleaning duties now participated more actively, some even taking pride in keeping their areas neat. It was an unspoken rule in certain prison blocks that filth wouldn't be tolerated, a rule that Capone had indirectly enforced. While many prisons of the time suffered from rampant disease due to unsanitary conditions, Alcatraz remained relatively clean. The prison administration had already enforced strict rules, but Capone's influence made hygiene an even bigger priority among the inmates. One of the most surprising results was that outbreaks of common prison illnesses, such as skin infections and respiratory diseases, were reportedly less frequent in the years following Capone's arrival. While this cannot be solely credited to him, his push for hygiene may have played a role in maintaining cleaner conditions. Even after Capone's departure, many of the habits that developed during his time remained. Guards continued enforcing stricter cleanliness standards, and prisoners maintained better hygiene compared to other penitentiaries. In a way, Capone had left behind an unexpected legacy, not of crime, but of cleanliness. Capone's strict personal hygiene was not just about cleanliness, it was also a survival mechanism. By the time he was in Alcatraz, his health was rapidly declining due to untreated syphilis. His immune system was weak, and he knew that any exposure to disease could accelerate his deterioration. To combat this, he took extra precautions. He avoided touching dirty surfaces, made sure his clothes were as clean as possible, and maintained personal grooming habits that were unusual for most inmates. He even reportedly used a handkerchief to avoid direct contact with communal objects. This obsession was likely an attempt to control what little he could in an environment where he had lost nearly all power. Unlike his time in Chicago, where he commanded an empire, in Alcatraz, he was just another inmate. Hygiene became one of the few things he could still control. Al Capone remains one of the most paradoxical figures in American history. He was responsible for some of the most violent crimes of the Prohibition era, yet he also played an unlikely role in promoting hygiene and cleanliness, both in his criminal enterprises and later in Alcatraz. While he is remembered primarily as a ruthless gangster, his obsession with hygiene left behind a surprising and unexpected impact. It's ironic that a man known for running one of the most brutal criminal organizations in history also contributed, in his own strange way, to making one of America's most notorious prisons a cleaner place. Perhaps this was a reflection of the dual nature of Capone himself, a man capable of both extreme violence and an odd fixation on order and cleanliness. Whatever the reason, his influence in Alcatraz remains a little-known but fascinating chapter in the story of America's most infamous gangster.